Hello, my friend. If you're watching this video, then on some level, I imagine recently you've said to yourself, I'm ready to understand how to more clearly identify my inner voice, but I want to be able to distinguish it from, let's just say my random thoughts or my feelings or emotions. Or perhaps on some level you said, I know that I can feel very strongly, but how can I tell when I'm just wrapped up in my emotions or patterns, and how can I tell when it's my real intuition? If so, well done on finding this video. I'm Danielle. One of the things that I am is an inner guide, and I hold these conversations for teachers and creators and beings like yourself who have chosen on some level to access their inner wisdom to lead a life that is a combination of both very practical and very mythically satisfying. And so, as mentioned, on today's video, one of the topics we're going to dive into is understanding how to more clearly identify your true inner voice. And part of the reason you're finding these videos, finding conversations like this, and perhaps even other videos or books in your life, is because on some level you have made a decision to have a deeper understanding of yourself. On some level you have chosen to be responsible for your energy. We are identifying how you can best remember how to connect to your intuition, to, let's call it, your voice of truth, your voice of resonance. And you do have the ability to attune to your natural inner state. And when you are in resonance or harmony with that part of yourself, then you are able to access many aspects of who you are naturally. When you have a certain level of resistance or stuckness, when you find a certain pattern in your life, such as procrastination, such as maybe avoidance or freezing, such as perhaps having a hard time with time, feeling like you have no time. A lot of these come from some form of patterning or belief that either originated at a childhood place, or sometimes it's something that you brought in with you. Now, either way, when you're exploring these kinds of things, these kinds of forms inside of you, one of the most powerful approaches that I suggest for people is one where you approach these experiences within yourself, not only with a sense of curiosity, but with a sense of camaraderie. Because these parts inside of yourself, because whether you want to look at it as your ego, your facade, whatever it is, I know that sometimes it can seem easy to demonize it, like, oh, that ego, this or that. But it's all parts of your experience. And consider that if you were, let's say, having a conversation with another person and you were just trying to steamroll them, what kind of interaction do you think that would be? Even if you were successful at steamrolling that person, then they might react in other ways, they might act in other ways, they might limp, they may not be helpful in certain ways. And in the same way, when you attempt to strong arm or force or coerce parts of yourself, then you might find resistance, even if not consciously, then it can happen subconsciously. And this is what sometimes happens with us when we wonder why certain things are happening or not happening in our lives. And it really all comes down to having conversations with ourselves. And so, again, coming back to this inner voice, why this is so important and powerful is because in a lot of ways we have many voices, emotions, experiences, all existing within ourselves as ourselves. You could say we are very multifaceted beings, not just from, let's say, I'll say it this way. We can look at it from the metaphysical perspective. Okay, you're an ego, or you have an ego, you have a subconscious, you have a soul, you have an expanded soul. If that's not something you resonate with, you could simply look at it as you have the memories of self from when you were younger, when you were a teenager, from right now. You have parts of yourself that remember at different levels. And any of those rememberings that is connected with emotion can exist and viscerally be experienced as real to you. If you want an example of that, think at a time when you were really excited, like a memory that you had that really elates you. And if you tune into that memory and you really let yourself be there, your body will have a physiological reaction. In the same way, if you remember something that, let's say, felt very cringy to you, and you're like, oh man, that memory, again, your body will have a physiological reaction. So even if it's just something simply perceived from a certain level, your body is reacting as though it is real. And in a very similar way, whether we perceive it as real or not, these parts of ourselves, these aspects of self, these ways that we interface within ourselves consciously and unconsciously can have a real echo, imprint, and impact on our lives. And our ability to discern whether we are receiving information from a core, let's say the core resonance that I talked about earlier in that video, or just other parts of yourself, again, it's not better or worse, but we're talking about maybe memories or emotional imprints or other aspects of self. And then there is the part of yourself that is your most clear and discerning true inner voice. Now, for myself, this voice comes through with a certain level of groundedness and clarity. If you notice, even though I love talking about, let's say, esoteric subjects, I actually very much enjoy talking about them in very grounded and practical ways. Because one of my great joys in life is being able to not just understand some of these, let's say, more out there subjects, but how we can then live them, how we can embody them and apply them in our day-to-day lives in the most practical ways. In fact, one of my joys is I love doing things in business, for example. And one of the things I've been able to do is apply heart-focused, heart-centered practices in my business strategies or in the ways that I approach these things. And I have been able to enjoy seeing, let's say, positive effects from applying them in that way. I realize I'm being very vague right now, but perhaps that's a discussion for a different video, because I'm more interested in focusing on this topic here about inner voice than going on that tangent at this moment. So, your inner voice, or I'll say it more accurately that I recognize my inner voice as being grounded. I recognize it as a certain kind of calmness. It's not excited, but it's more of a feeling of assurance and sure footing. It's like a breath of fresh air. And when I'm experiencing my inner voice, there is a clarity. And if I choose to speak with my inner voice, it's similar to what you're hearing here right now. Like I am feeling the voice come from my heart and my gut space and my throat space. Something I share with people is when you're talking from this space in your body, it sounds a little different than when you're talking up here with your throat. Like if your voice comes all the way up here versus dropping it down into the body where your whole body is speaking, you can actually feel the difference. And if you would like, you could even test that for yourself right now. Now, I know I'm using an example of an actual voice, but what I have found is that when I speak with this whole body voice, I can actually feel my words as they come out and whether or not they harmonize with my whole being. And because I am daily, is that a word? Because every day I'm focusing on my values and every day I'm focusing on what is true and resonant to me, this becomes one of the, you could say, the blueprints from which I am feeling my resonance reflect off of. In the same way, when you can apply things like your mantras or your affirmations, in a way you're attuning your body to those. And so when you speak, when you resonate, you can actually feel whether the way you're speaking or talking is actually in harmony with what you have attuned yourself to. But even that, right? I'm talking a little bit about how we can work with ourselves. So when you feel, let's say, different sensations in your body, if you feel excitement, you feel fear, you feel nervousness, I have never found that my intuition speaks in the form of fear. I have never found that my intuition speaks in the form of worry or anxiety. There have been times that my intuition has been loud. There's times that it has been like, stop or go, or, you know, like it will just be clear. Like it will be like, oh, all right. But it does not, in my experience, speak in fear. In my experience, fear can come from the ego. And again, no shame or condemnation to the ego. This is just one of the ways you can understand and remember where these different experiences, sensations, and voices come from. Taking a moment to attune. See if there's something else to add here in regards to that. What I feel inspired to do is I feel like that's a very good share when it comes to inner voice, when it comes to being able to attune. What I will speak on today is there were a few questions in some recent videos, and one of the questions was, someone was saying that they sometimes feel that when they talk about something they want to do, they feel like things can get in the way and stop them from achieving it. But when they don't talk about it, then they can achieve it just fine. And they shared, once it's spoken about, it's like they feel that the universe conspires against it. So the simple thing I'll say about that is, whatever you perceive to be true is what is. And when I am reading that, I am hearing that you have a permission slip, you have a pattern that is agreed upon consciously or unconsciously in your reality, that when there is something that you want to do, as long as you don't speak it, then it is done. But the moment you speak it, it's not. Now, that doesn't mean that that limitation, or let's just call it, doesn't even be a limitation. It doesn't mean that that pattern must exist, but at the same time, it simply does exist for you. And it exists for you until it ceases to exist. Now, anytime we want to shift a pattern or patterning in general, one of the first steps we take is to be aware of it, which is what it sounds like you're doing, because you have awareness of this pattern. So well done. That's the first main step. From there, if this is a pattern that you wish to shift, one of the things that you can start doing is you can start sharing a conversation with yourself and say, isn't it so interesting how this in the past has happened? But I am so curious about how it can be different from this point now forward. And see, what we're doing is we're not trying to push or change something, because what happens when we sometimes attempt to immediately change it is we may meet resistance with it. One of the reasons I'm a big fan of curiosity is that it allows for playfulness with the pattern. It's like the difference between trying to smack against something and coming to it gently. And there's something about the gentleness that allows you to permeate beyond what would normally be a wall in perception and in energy. It's like the gentleness allows shifts to happen. And so, again, if it's a pattern that you want to shift, the first thing to do, the first thing to remember is that what this is it's a belief. It's a belief that's been well practiced. And you can start asking yourself, okay, if I was to have a different belief, what might that look like? If I was to start doing this a different way, how could that show up in my life? And remember, this is not just for this. You can do this for anything in your life that you're ready to shift. The other element of it, first step is awareness. The other element is curiosity and then consistency. Once you are curious and you find a path that feels good, I wonder what would happen if I was allowed to write down what I was going to do as a first step, right? Even though it's not sharing with anyone yet, in a sense, it's putting it out there. What would happen if I did that? What would happen if I told my pet or my cat? What would happen if I told just one friend? And you connect that with maybe a small goal to start. Because what this is doing is this is starting to shift the pattern in reality. And if you start with consistency and something small just to show, then your reality starts to shift a little bit. You start thinking, oh, I can see that can change, that I can say something and this happens. That's interesting. I wonder what might happen next. And what I'm describing is, potentially a gradual process. But I will say that yes, we can also shift quantumly, as I'll call it as well. You can have radical shifts as well. However, I have found it's best to just approach it without a specific kind of timeline or expectation on how it must shift. And if you allow it to show up and work with you in the most easeful way, if you are consistent and gentle, if you are curious without forcing it to change, notice I'm kind of talking in a paradox. Notice how much I love paradox. This is the paradox of deep transformation. It's change that is applied without requiring it to change. And you may hear this from other places, other channels, where they talk about, if you want something, if you truly want something to change, then shift from the place of wanting it into the place of having it. In a sense, the more you want or need it, the further it seems to come, into yourself, into your care. That's the paradox. So let's start there with that answer. And I imagine that this is of deep service for all of us. And if you have any further questions or comments, I always love hearing them. If this has been of service to you, please do like and subscribe. I am hosting another group here shortly. So if you would like to be part of this group, please go ahead and let me know. You can either write in the comments and I can reach out. I wonder if it will work that way. I guess we'll find out. Additionally, you can take a look in the description and I will have links there as well. As always, it has been such a joy to connect with you, and I look forward to our next conversation.